Hello, today we are going to summarize the 2026 G7 summit that happened in France. The G7 summit in France showed how wide the G7 agenda has become. This was not only a meeting about one crisis or one economic issue. The leaders adopted nine joint statements covering security, global growth, international partnership, critical minerals, public health, digital safety, migrant smuggling, drug trafficking, and geopolitics. The main message is that G7 now sees the global challenges as a deeply connected. A war in Ukraine can affect energy markets. A shipping crisis in the Middle East can raise the cost for households and businesses. Critical minerals can shape the future of clean energy and technology. And issues like online child safety, cancer, Ebola, and organized crimes are no longer seen as a separate social issues. They are a part of a broader global stability agenda. So, the France summit was really about resilience, how major democracies can protect their economy, strengthen security, support the partners, and respond faster to health and technological risk. Geopolitics was at the center of the France summit. The G7 leaders reaffirmed strong support for Ukraine, especially its sovereignty and territorial integrity. They also emphasized the need for more defenses, interceptors, and long range support because Ukraine's ability to defend its infrastructure remains central to the wider European security picture. The summit also focused on increasing pressure on Russia's war economy. This means that using sanctions and restrictions, including in oil and gas, to reduce the Russia's ability to finance the war. The idea is not only to support Ukraine militarily, but also to weaken the financial machine behind the conflict. The Middle East was another major focus. The G7 supported the diplomatic efforts to prevent the Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon and stressed the importance of free transit through the Strait of Hormuz. This matters because the Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most important energy choke points. Any disruption there can quickly affect oil prices, shipping costs, and global inflation. So, this slide shows that for the G7, security is no longer just about the military alliances. It is also about energy routes, sanctions, shipping lanes, and economic pressure. This slide focuses on the economic side of the summit. The G7 leaders recognize that the global economy is still fragile. Energy supplies, fertilizers, and agricultural imports remain vulnerable, and these pressures can affect everyone, from industries and farmers to ordinary households. One important theme was trade and energy security. The leaders called for the safe transit through the Strait of Hormuz and emphasized stable, transparent energy and commodity markets. In simple terms, they want fewer sudden shocks in oil, gas, food, and fertilizers market because those shocks can raise the prices worldwide. Another major point was the economic security. The G7 wants countries to reduce the excessive dependence on a single suppliers or concentrated supply chains. For example, if one country controls a large share of a key input, it can create risk for the industries, clean energy, technology, and defenses. The summit also linked artificial intelligence to finance. Finance ministers and central banks were asked to examine both the opportunities and the risk of the frontier AI, including its impact on productivity, jobs, and financial stability. So, economic resilience now means more than GDP growth. It means secure trade routes, reliable supply chain, stable energy, and careful management of the new technologies. This slide shows how the G7 connected development finance with economic security. On one side, the leaders discussed international partnership and development finance. They argue that the global development system needs to become more effective, less fragmented, and more partner led. This includes helping countries mobilize more domestic resources, attract private capital, and manage debt more transparently. Many developing countries face high debt servicing costs, which can reduce their ability to invest in health, education, infrastructure, and growth. The G7 therefore emphasized faster and more predictable debt restructuring processes. On the other side, the summit focused heavily on the critical minerals. These minerals are essential for batteries, electric vehicles, clean energy systems, semiconductors, and defense technologies. The G7 wants to diversify supply chain, reduce concentrated dependence, and coordinate against economic coercion or arbitrary export restrictions. A key number here is that 195 critical minerals related projects were announced in the 2026, representing around 64 billion euros in investment. The G7 also set a target to reduce the dependence on a single outside supplier for rare earth and permanent magnets to under 60% by 2030, with a long-term ambition to move towards 50% as soon as possible. So the bigger message is that development partnership and supply chain securities are now linked. The G7 wants a strong partner countries, but also more secure access to materials that power the future economy. Health was another major part of the France summit. The first health issue was the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. The G7 called for a strong coordinated response focusing on contact tracing, testing, border preparedness, quarantine, community engagement, and medical support. The statement highlighted that this outbreak is especially difficult because it is an isolated and affected area, and existing vaccine, diagnostic, and treatment are not fully effective against the rare strain. That is why the leaders emphasized the need for dedicated vaccines, diagnostic, and treatments. The slide also shows the scale of support. The United States had deployed more than 370 million US dollars in health and humanitarian resources with a commitment of up to an additional 500 million for Ebola response efforts. The European Union also had 493 million euros in ongoing support for emergency aid, vaccines, treatment, and health security in the Great Lakes and Uganda region. The second health issue was cancer. The G7 noted that cancer kills nearly 10 million people each year worldwide, and new cases are projected to rise by 80% by 2050. The leaders therefore called for a stronger prevention, screening, early diagnosis, research collaboration, and better international data sharing, especially for pediatric and adolescent cancers. The key point is that health security is now treated as a strategic global issue, not just a medical issue. This slide shows how the G7 brought in the idea of security. Traditionally, security meant borders, defense, and military threats. But at the France, the G7 also focused on digital safety, migrant smuggling, and drug trafficking. The first area was online safety for minors. The leaders called for a digital service that are safe by design, age appropriate, and privacy preserving. They are they also supported stronger parental controls and better age assurance systems while trying to reduce children's exposure to harmful content and addictive design features. The second area was migrant smuggling. The G7 wants to dismantle organized criminal networks that profit from the vulnerable people. This includes disrupting their business models, working with the countries of origin and transit, and cooperating with online platforms to remove the content used for smuggling operations. The third area was drug trafficking. The leader described drug trafficking as a growing threat to national security, public health, democratic institutions, and economic stability. They called for a stronger anti-money laundering tools, better asset recovery, stronger maritime and port security, and the creation of a G7 plus ports network to combat drug trafficking. So the larger message is that modern security is not only about armies, it is also about protecting children online, stopping criminal networks, and securing ports, borders, and digital platforms. The final slide brings the whole summit together. The France summit produced 9 joint statements, showing that the G7 agenda is now much broader than traditional diplomacy. The first big takeaway is the geopolitical angle. Ukraine, Russia, the Middle East, and the Strait of Hormuz are all treated as the major security and economic issues. The second takeaway is that the economic security now includes supply chain, critical minerals, AI, and energy resilience. The G7 is trying to reduce vulnerabilities before they become the crisis. The third takeaway is that the health cooperation is expanding. The Ebola response shows the need for faster em- emergency coordination, while the cancer statement shows the importance of long-term disease prevention, research, and data sharing. The fourth key takeaway is that the G7 now see the digital safety and organized crime as a strategic governance issue. Protecting the minors online, tackling the migrant smuggling, and fighting the drug trafficking are all part of a wider effort to make the society safer and more resilient. Overall, the message was the world's major democracies are trying to prepare for a future where security, economics, health, technology, and crime are all connected. The G7 summit is not just to respond to today's crisis, but to build a system that can withstand the next ones. Thank you.